Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Blacknificent Show. My name is Monana, and I am a Black child on the rise. I will be your host tonight. Tonight's topic is a spin off on social justice, particularly in relation to the upcoming public holiday being Youth Day. I've asked our guests today to help me speak on activism and advocacy for our people today in our daily lives. So today we're going to unpack all there is to Youth Day in 2021. My guest tonight is a young Black woman who's already made serious moves, not just nationally, but internationally too. She is an admitted advocate of the High Court of South Africa and a CEO of the Justice and Equity brand and company called Advocate Thando Gumede ZA, through which she does global feminist education, speaking, transformation, and consulting. She's also the founder of an internationally award-winning technology called M-Teto search engine, and it uses artificial intelligence and big data to prevent and respond to incidences of school-related gender-based violence among children and youths around the world. You may even recognize her from a certain TV show, a feminist talk show that hit our TVs throughout the past year. So allow me to present to you Advocate Thando Gumede. Dumela ausi o kae?
Thank you so much, Kia. That was such a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
How are you?
Not too bad. I think I'm contemplative and I'm reflective, and I'm really
Okay.
excited to have this conversation because I've just been thinking about, what is it really that we're celebrating. This month is quite interesting because it's also a Pride Month as well.
True.
A couple of years ago, we had the rights of the stone wall. Um, so it's always interesting to kind of contemplate why we're commemorating certain things and sometimes why we're celebrating certain things. And, now that Youth Day is coming up, I think that the conversation is ripe because we ought to be reflecting on what it is that we are commemorating. And
Yeah.
especially now that we are, or at least I would like to think that the youth of today is, while we're at a disadvantage, there are a number of us who are now preparing ourselves to sit at the helm of society and to begin to drive forward the consciousness and the agenda of the times.
Yeah.
So I think the conversation is very much relevant and I'm excited for it.
I'm glad you are. I'm glad you are. Just to dive into today's conversation or today's topic in particular, do you view yourself as an activist? And if you do, what is your term or what is your the best way that you can define the term activism and what it means to you?
Um, you know, I think that someone who is an activist is someone who takes a set of values and actively executes on that. I always steer away from calling myself an activist, and here's why. I've never considered myself an activist, precisely because anyone can be an activist. You can be a racist and be an activist,
And be an
activisting
activist, true.
for
Yeah.
bigotist ideology.
Mm.
So I'm very careful about using that word of being an
Okay.
activist. I think people must be very clear in calling themselves exactly what they are based on their values. So I would rather someone call themselves a white supremacist than to call themselves an activist, because activist is a generic term that
True.
assumes that someone is on the right side of history. And as we've seen in the past, that's not necessarily the case. I can be an activist who is fighting for abortion to be abolished, which
Yeah.
goes entirely against the rights of women to have their own bodily autonomy, their own choice. And in some instances, those are, victims of gross violences who have to succumb to patriarchy in terms of what they do with their bodies. So I consider myself a feminist. I consider
Okay.
myself an intersectional Black feminist uh, and more than that, in my growth and my evolution, I would say that I'm about feminist Ubuntu, which is about the
Okay.
unification of people around the world,
Okay.
moving towards the dismantling of white heteropatriarchy. Now that I've been on the global stage or in global spaces and on global platforms, I'm seeing more and more a pattern of fragmentation of a pseudo-feminist movement. And what I mean by
Yes.
that is that I see that there are a lot of people who claim themselves to be feminists, but who easily would fight against, um, you know, queer people and queerness, who
Mm,
would
mm,
easily tell girls what to wear, to
mm.
protect themselves from,
Yeah.
violence, for instance, and who are apologetic to rape and rape culture.
Mm-hmm.
So for me now, as I transition and I now move into a whole new level of um, my contribution to humanity, I find that feminist Ubuntuism is probably the best way to describe where I'm at and what I stand for. You know,
Okay.
um, especially in the feminist movement, I have found that blackness has been intentionally, I don't think it's unintentional, I think it has been intentionally erased,
Yeah.
intentionally left out. I remember listening to, I was reading a book on feminism recently, and I was shocked at how I couldn't see my own narrative in my ancestors. You know,
Okay.
I could easily see the narrative of white women and what their ancestors were doing, but I couldn't see my own ancestors, and I couldn't
Mm,
see the ancestors of women in Asia, for instance, and I
mm.
could see very little of the ancestral footprint of women in South America and other indigenous peoples. So BIPOC women have almost been entirely erased from feminist history, as if to say that feminism was the genius of white women and
Mm.
has been progressed by white women, and we are sort of these people that caught on afterwards, riding on the
Yeah.
coattails of
Yeah.
this white movement. When in fact, even in our own country, we had women who were left out of political spaces that were formed by white women.
True.
And so those black women
Purposefully. Yeah.
then formed their own spaces, but they were inclusive. They included other people of color, and they opened the space to anyone who wanted to join, who was a woman, who wanted to fight for the liberation, wanted to fight in particular for political liberation, the right to vote
Yeah.
and universal franchise. So we were revolutionizing feminism and revolutionizing society without that necessarily
Yeah.
being documented. And even if you go
Mm.
online today, what you normally see is um, Black women being treated as though, oh, they were also there. No, we were leading them.
Yeah.
We did a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of our revolution today emanates from the groundwork that was being done by Black women. The Black liberation movement in this country, and it excites me a lot, was one because there was an understanding, even by Black men, even by Black patriots at the time, that
Mm.
um, we needed the masses of women, in
Mm.
particular of Black women, and the labor
Mm.
of Black women was at the center, at the core of our,
Yeah.
universal liberation. So yeah, that's what I am, and that's what my activism means to me. My activism is about recognizing that colonization played and continues
Okay.
even to this day to play
Yes.
a fundamental role in how we're experiencing oppression today. And that, the Bible and whiteness brought with it the myth of, Black, colorful, or melanated skin being inferior. I mean, they were using eugenics to prove that Black people were,
Yeah.
far less intelligent than white people, which, I mean, we know now today was absolute nonsense, right? And using the Bible to pontificate that white people were meant to be the guardians and the caretakers of Black people and of Blackness, because of that superiority context, and that they were here not by accident but by God's will to look
Yeah, they were
after,
divine beings.
exactly. And of course, with the Bible also came heteronormativity. And so queerness, even though us as Africans have recognized the fluidity of gender, we've always respected people that were queer in our community. In some communities, queer people were seen to be reveled because they were believed to have powers, which I think,
Okay.
is an idea that can be problematic today, But I think the point in that narrative is the fact that we've always been there. Queer people have
Mm.
always been there. And so I'm very much about dismantling white heteronormativity, and especially misogyny, but most especially misogynoir, which is a targeted hatred and discrimination of Black women. Me being a queer Black woman, it means so much for me to fight, to dismantle all of the fibers that make up the
Yeah.
fabric of oppression.
Mm. I think I smile a lot like when you speak and just listening to you speak. Not because I find you amusing or something, but I'm honestly like every single time you speak, I literally can't help but just get lost in just your passion. I like it's crazy. But let me just calm down. I was going to ask what you're most passionate about, but I think you just answered that. It's definitely feminism. I don't think that's even a question. Um,
Mm.
so according to a lot of people, Youth Day is to commemorate the lives of those that we lost in 1976, but also it's to celebrate and thank the youth of 76 for their bravery and essentially for their activism, you know?
Mm.
What does Youth Day mean to you in particular?
Uh, you know, Youth Day, Women's Day, Pride Day, these days mean very little to me because I don't see the
Okay.
advancement in society. Even now, I'm exhausted. I mean, I'm sure you know me on social media. I'll be like, happy XYZ Day. When we had International Women's Day in March, I was more than happy to speak on that. And I've done so in the past couple of years. But for the past few months, I found myself being exhausted. And
Okay.
I'm not exhausted from work. I'm exhausted because I'm like, but what does this mean? You know, what are we really celebrating? What are we really commemorating? For me, I feel like we just spend a lot of money commercializing these days, and certainly corporates gain a lot of money in capitalizing and profiting from these days.
True.
um,
True.
so I don't know anymore. This
Yeah,
is a tough question to answer. I don't know. I don't know what it means to me anymore.
I hear you. I
Um,
think you.
Go ahead.
No, no, no. Continue.
I think that what we were supposed to do was to embed the commemoration of our history in everything that we do. Um,
True.
to make sure that our children are taught about our history
Mm.
from the time they are children, and the truth of our history, and not talking about rainbows that don't
The
exist.
nonsense and yeah.
Yeah, and we failed to do that. And I know we failed to do that because if you look at the children who are in our basic education system now, I'm worried.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Okay.
really worried because it cannot be that after 27 years of democracy, we've got children talking about racist violations in their schools. we are talking about sexism and gender-based violence taking place in our schools.
Yeah.
And so I'm worried. I'm worried that we thought that merely voting for Black leadership was going to be enough.
Thank you.
And I think
Yeah.
we've realized that it's not enough.
It's
But
not enough.
on top of that realization, I'm not seeing enough work being done to
Change it.
leverage on that realization and to say, oh, gosh, okay, I think we got it all wrong. Let's maybe try to do
Let's
things
do something
differently.
about it.
We're
Yeah.
still, using the same blueprint, still doing the same things over and over again. And, when that Brackenfell story hit, I mean, there's been a number of stories. I know about a number of stories, but when the Brackenfell story hit of the students who excluded Black students from their organized matric dance function, a lot of people were angry. But for me, I think after my rage, I felt a sense of deep sadness and of deep disappointment that, oh no, we've just let down another generation. Oh no, we have just failed our children. Oh no, we have just raised another generation of racist children who are going to have to undo their racism as adults. And it's going to be painful. It's going to be painful
And
for them
hard.
once they're 30 or 40, yeah. And they realize, oh my goodness, I've been participating actively in dehumanizing other human beings. But what they don't realize is that all along, really what they were doing was dehumanizing themselves by attempting to dehumanize other human beings. We failed. We failed. So for me, I've been spending a lot less time celebrating, and I've just been spending more time working with other people behind the scenes to conjure up the solutions. And I think you'll see probably in 2022, a lot of that is going to be, more public than what it is now. But the days that other people spend commemorating, celebrating, are the days that I spend with my head down, my back bent, and just working on the solutions. How do we make sure we not only do not groom another racist generation, that we don't groom another queerphobic generation, that we don't groom another misogynoistic generation, ableist generation, elitist generation. So for me, my days are just spent on doing that, but collaborating with other young leaders who are either at the forefront or who are part of the foot soldiers, and doing that. For me, that these days are just another day to work and to continue to work until you can see the impact of it in society. Until we can have people who have matric dances where trying to exclude a particular demographic is just absolutely ludicrous. Until that day comes, um, I'll have my head down in my books, in front of my computer, um, trying to solve the problems of the day.
I think we've already established, because I think most of the questions you're kind of answering in your previous answers, we've kind of already established that you don't think Youth Day is still respected and it still carries the same weight. Where and how do you think that this passion was lost for Youth Day?
I don't think it ever was there. I think it was a pseudo passion. I think we were lost in the euphoria of the Rainbow Nation, the Desmond Tutu's Rainbow Nation. We were lost in the euphoria. And I mean, look, I don't want to blame Black people too much, because after so many centuries of pain, after so many centuries of hurt and of damage,
A
that
little bit
moment was
thing is enough.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was hope. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating hope.
Mm.
But I think what we realized quite soon actually, but I think that Rainbow Nation, that Rainbow Nation euphoria was hectic, eh? Uh, and some people are still trying to hold on to it for dear life.
Still.
Um, but I think that the reality is that the democratic project, the real groundwork of the democratic project,
Mm-hmm.
never really existed. You know,
Okay.
I think only the bare minimum was done, maybe even less than the bare minimum was done.
Way
Because
less.
for me, the bare minimum is solving issues around education. And if you haven't solved
Okay.
that, then you haven't really done much because education sits at the core of our society. You know, human beings are designed from conception to learn. Even a human being, let's say, who might have um, a birth defect and might have, therefore, a disability which impairs, the functioning of the brain. Um,
Okay.
we celebrate that, for instance, a person can now do the dishes on their own. We
Mm.
celebrate that they can tie their shoes or they can look after themselves. So even in those instances of adversity, we celebrate knowledge, knowing how to, you know, having a better understanding of the world. It is part of
Mm.
our fiber as human beings. It's woven within us to perpetually be learning and to understanding and to be growing and to be transforming and to be evolving. But we didn't prioritize that. We didn't prioritize
True.
making sure that we were going to eradicate every single inch of that apartheid colonial
Mm.
education system that wanted to see that Black people do not learn over a certain level because knowledge is power. You know, Mandela was right in saying that, Bob Mandela was right in saying that, knowledge is power. It really is power. And every single regime, and I want you to think of this, every regime, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
sexist regime, whether it's a racist regime,
Yeah.
every oppressive regime uses education and sites of education against
Okay.
uh, victimized groups and marginalized
Sure.
groups. So, for instance, women weren't allowed to get an education to go to university. Even if a woman had a superior IQ, you'd make sure that she only learns to a certain extent, or that you allow her to go learn, but she must always remember that her place is in the kitchen. And with Black people as well, even if you were highly intelligent, there'd always be a
Mm-hmm.
barrier that you would hit. Either maybe you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to afford funding at university, which still happens today, or you would be disallowed from entering a particular institution of higher learning because it's not for your demographic. It's only for white people, you know. So there is so much power in disabling someone through
True.
taking away education. And taking away
Mm.
education is not just about um, that moment of reading a book. It's also about the environment and how conducive the environment is for that education to
Okay.
take place. So I'm doing my master's now in law, assessing um, basic and higher education rights
Mm-hmm.
insofar as women, queer, children, and disabled people are concerned,
Okay.
and looking at um, the state's provision of what I call attendance resources. Because if I menstruate for 10 days and as a result of that, I can't go to school,
Okay.
because I'm on my period for those for 5 or 7 of those days because I'm on my
Mm-hmm.
period. That's something that takes away from my experience of learning. If I can't move around and maneuver myself at school because the school was never built for a person with disability, then
Yeah.
that takes away from my education and from my
Mm-hmm.
environment. So the environment also has to be very enabling. If a school is racist in its culture, then it makes it very antagonistic for me to come here. I'm constantly being triggered and traumatized in this space. It's
True.
difficult for me to learn. You know,
True.
I can't come here without having medication or without having the services of a counselor who will calm me down and talk me down and make me see my worth and my value as a human being because the space is constantly dehumanizing me. So it's also about the environment and making sure that um, the resources are there, making sure that um, the environment is conducive and is healthy. Can't have an environment where teachers are sexually harassing children and raping children. You know, those are things that are important that have to be dissected and unpacked. So it's this intersectional, multi-layered thing. You can never look at
True.
education as just being this homogenous thing that is about pens and books. No, also the content of what we're learning is really important. If we're not teaching the history of our society,
The right
then where are
stuff.
we going?
Yeah.
Because what we might be doing also is fostering an environment where we are uh, grooming the next generation of people who are sexist because we never took the time to intentionally be anti-sexist, to intentionally
True.
be anti-racist. It's not enough to say you're not racist. You have to be
True.
anti. You have to be
True.
actively not racist. And part of that means um, learning about history and learning the truth, accurate history, not the history of not the history that centers Black people as these perpetual victims, but a history that
Mm.
also looks at the greatness of Blackness, that will unpack Black civilizations, giant civilizations that, quite frankly, were at the center of commerce at one point, were at the center of civilization, of human intelligence and genius at one point. you know so it's about showing the whole context and opening
Yeah.
that up to children. We didn't do that. We didn't prioritize that, and that was important. That was critical. Being
Yeah.
colorblind, being gender blind, sex blind, queer blind, it hasn't worked, and it will never work. It's a model that just doesn't work.
Do you think that Youth Day is something that needs transformation, or do you think it's just a holiday that we should do away with? Do you think like it's still worthy of being celebrated in like our contemporary South Africa?
Let me just sort out my video quickly. Can you just ask me that question again, Kia?
Perfect. I was saying, do you think that Youth Day is something that we should still, or we should try to transform, or do you think it's a holiday that we should do away with, considering like the South Africa that we live in now, so our contemporary South Africa?
No, I don't think so, because I don't think that should be the response, because erasure of identity and erasure of history is a tool that is used
Okay.
by systems of oppression. We had King
Okay.
Shaga's Day, for example. Now we call it Bride Day.
Mm.
It went from being a day to commemorate the Zulu nation and its king, which is one of the biggest nations, if not the biggest nation, not in the region, and his attempts to unify Africa into one, which is what we're trying to do today,
Yeah.
by the way. Um, and I find it a bit odd that we want to use Kiswahili, which is I mean, hundreds of years ago, that's what Shaka was trying to do, was trying to have one universal language, one people, and one regime. But I mean, I think that's arguable for today. I'm just saying that it's just weird how we're kind of trying to do that.
Okay.
I don't think it's wise to erase
Okay.
because, as I mentioned, there've been very slow erasures that have been taking place, and Heritage Day is probably one of them.
Yeah.
It went from being a day that we celebrated a very defined group of people to then going the exact opposite and calling it Braai Day.
Yeah.
Braai, which is not even our word. That's like an Afrikaans slang word, that comes from a language that doesn't come from this continent. Afrikaans, I don't care about whether it's a dialect, whether it's called kitchen Dutch. I don't care. It's not from here. It's from another European country. It's Dutch. It's Dutch that has been undone, and um, but it's not ours. It's not our language. It doesn't come from here. Its roots are not from here. So we've gone from calling the day King Shaka's Day to Braai Day. So it's weird, we live in a weird world. So I don't think we
It's
should
upsetting.
not
Like
do that.
I'm glad you can laugh about it. It's upsetting.
Yeah, okay, you get to a point where you're so hyper exposed to the stuff that some of it will make you laugh.
True.
Some of the racist things that happen
Yeah,
in
no.
our society. I mean, Helen Zilla is just running amok. She's just doing as she wishes. It doesn't matter. She just says what she wants to. And at some point, it becomes so enraging that you just need to kind of laugh it off. So I don't think that we should erase the days at all, because I think then the people who are responsible for our oppression will be very happy. But what I do think is that we need to back up why we are commemorating and celebrating those days. So when we reflect, it needs to be to say, guys, we are celebrating women because they were oppressed at one point, and now they are on par with men, and that's something to be celebrated. And we need to commemorate where that comes from, so that we don't find ourselves where we are now. But we find ourselves in an incredibly sexually. South Africa is the rape capital of the world. That is ridiculous.
Crazy.
And then you want me to celebrate Women's Day. Why? What am I celebrating? Because as far as I'm concerned, we're in the 1800s. My body is being policed. My womb is being policed. People are interested with what's going on in my underwear. It's society is doing the most, but then I'm expected to humble myself that at least you've got a day.
Yeah.
That's just and I think what we need to be doing is that, at the very least, because we are not where we want to be, when we're not where we want to be by a long shot, we're very far. So I think going forward, what we should do maybe with these days is to have conversations like the one we're having now.
Okay.
Where we really begin to unpack and to assess and to reflect, but also to come up with solutions and to unpack, the plans of action that will make sure that the next time we have these days, that we are further along.
We know what we're doing. True.
So yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Today's youth has a reputation of being just like, they have a bad reputation. I know we're always being called like self-serving, lazy. Is this something that you agree with, and why or why not?
That question. I mean, I think the question itself is just or the people that say that are lazy in and of themselves. Lazy to think. We a society that is so complex. Our challenges are different, but also I think there's been a lot of gaslighting of young people. let's take higher education, for example.
Okay.
A lot of us were told as children to read and to study and to really apply our minds to liberate ourselves through the book, you know. And I mean,
Okay.
you know, our mothers did a lot. I mean, I know of, you know, many single mothers who broke their backs to make sure that their children got the best education, you know.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I think the sentiment for people of my generation, like 40 under generation, has always been that education is that thing that will liberate you.
Mm.
But I think what we've come to realize is that it's not true.
Okay.
Education is the foundation of what we need. Because once we then understand the world that we're living in, to understand our values, and to begin to pave a way forward and to solve problems. Education also assists us in having the intelligence to understand how to solve problems. That is very important as a foundation, but it's not enough.
Okay.
So what we are seeing, I mean, if it was enough, the youth wouldn't be unemployed. We have
True.
got hundreds of thousands of young people who are highly qualified and unemployed. So I think that we were sold a lie. We were told that all we needed to do was to get a degree to be successful.
True.
That if we wanted to dismantle whiteness and heteropatriarchy, all we had to do was, you know, put our heads down and put pen to paper. And then we realized, oh, actually, it's not enough because
Yeah.
white people still owed land in this country. And the private sector and corporate environment has interwoven whiteness. And so even if I came with my Black intelligence in a white corporate space, that's just not going to work.
True.
You find yourself, I've seen a lot of young Black people say, hey, guys, like, I had to make a choice. Either I put food on the table and play along with white people and the things that they want, or I'm jobless. And a lot of young people have sold out.
True.
Because the environment is just so hostile. It's so hostile for us that a lot decided to put bread on the table, because remember, they're not just looking after themselves. You know, they've got black tax to pay.
True.
They've got homes that need to be renovated, some that need to just be completely rebuilt, some who need to move out of the neighborhood completely, out of the slum that they were living in. And so when you say that we're lazy, it's a very damaging statement to make. Because it says it's damaging and it's dangerous, because it tells young people that the education that you've acquired, and education in general, is unimportant. And that you know, everything that we've done up to this point is meaningless. It means nothing. So that statement is a very irresponsible statement to make. And I think it's made by someone who is completely out of touch with the contemporary times, out of touch with how colorism now takes new forms, how we are hyper exposed to images that show a palatable Blackness and nothing beyond that show whiteness as superior. And I mean, I think also one of the most dangerous characteristics of our modern times are the buying and selling of Black body parts. the commodification of Black beauty as worn by white women, you know. So it's our Blackness, but it's like it's unzipped and it's put onto someone else. And when it's taken away from us and worn by someone else, it's worth more.
True.
When the bums are big, they're nice when they're on a white person,
A white woman. True.
you know. When the curves are there, it's nice if it's on a white woman because of the skin and, you know, stereotyping of Black women as being tough and hard, and, you know, Black men want some tenderness. um, so this is someone who's out of touch with contemporary times, who's out of touch with our struggles of the day, and who's also out of touch with how prior generations themselves are responsible for making promises that they didn't keep, and how detrimental that has been to us.
True.
How there was a promise for free education, how you told us that education would liberate us, and then made a promise that the conquest of that education would be handed to us so that we could liberate not only ourselves, but the entire nation, the whole continent, the world. And then even that is something that is exploited, you know. And so there's just been a lot of damaging things that have been happening, that have been going under the radar. I think in particular for Black women, and just a lot of gaslighting has been going on. And yeah, it's totally an insensitive, ignorant statement to make. It's a statement made by incredibly ignorant people who are completely out of touch, who've probably benefited in some way or another. And now see that anyone who isn't on their level is lazy. And that's not necessarily true.
The Youth Day protest was, I mean, it was prompted by the unfair education system and its prejudice against Black students in particular, you know. So as we've already discussed, today's education system looks very different, like completely different. But do you think that this is enough? And I think you've already answered this, but in you saying that just changing the education system itself is not enough, what else could be done? Like what could be done on top of it?
Yeah, I think, you know, let's delve a bit deeper into what, you know, the education system does look like in South Africa. We've still got mud schools. We've got schools that use pit toilets. We've got schools that don't provide sanitary products for girls so they can stay in school. We've got schools that don't have all of the resources inside of the classroom. We have schools that don't have enough money allocated to them to make sure that quality teachers are being employed and that those teachers are continuously being trained on particular material and work. That's very important. And a lot of South Africans are not aware of that, why the quality of teaching is not the same. The content of what we're teaching our children is not content that would build an equitable human being. It isn't content, for instance, that addresses diverse as a standard, not because I'm at a private school, I'm learning this, but as a standard for us to have a subject in school focused just on equity. So not pushing things into the allo subjects, you know, that doesn't fit into other. Having a subject. I used to call it Ubuntu Studies last year, but I changed it because everyone is using the word Ubuntu. So now I call it Equity Studies. So having Equity Studies, or you can call it like Equity and Ubuntu Studies, I guess. Having Equity and Ubuntu Studies embedded in our education as a subject, a compulsory subject done from early childhood education right through to the end of a person's university degree,
True.
first university degree. And in that education, we tell the truth of who we were as people prior to colonization, because we had an identity before that. And I think it's also dangerous for us to only remember ourselves as colonized creatures and nothing beyond that. To not understand ourselves as having been kings and queens, having been intellectuals, inventors, and innovators. The pharmaceutical industry that we see today comes from our indigenous knowledge systems. There are whole lands. If you go to Natal, or I mean, anywhere, I guess in the country, but I'm a Zulu person. If you go to Natal, you see, when I go home to Natal, I see acres of land owned by Europeans who are using the land to study. I always wondered why is this field there? What's going on here? No, it's being used by some Europeans who are studying, the plants there.
Sure.
So it's not just our diamonds and our golds and our minerals. It's pretty much everything that has been extracted from Africa to nourish the whole world and then sold back to us. And that has to be taught in schools.
Do you think that there's something that we are doing as Black people to ourselves that's holding us back? One thing, multiple things.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of elaborate on a statement that I made earlier about selling out.
Okay.
So there's two forms of selling out that I've seen taking place.
Okay.
I'm going to start with the one that I mentioned today, which is that we as young people, as young Black people, have to accept that we've got work to do. We can't be looking for perpetual soft life. Can't be like that. We've got work to do. The soft life maybe will be for our grandchildren, but we've got to work. I've seen young Black people selling out because they want to perpetually drink sparkling wine, because they want to perpetually have the money to go out and to wear the fancy labels and to drive the fancy cars at the expense of the work that needs to be done to liberate all people of color. And that is a shame. That is a damn shame. Because the truth is that we were born into an adverse identity, a controversial identity, not because the identity itself is wrong or problematic, but because a group of other people decided that it was wrong. And now we have to spend the rest of our lives undoing the damage that those people did.
Yeah.
Mind you, they've never apologized. Which is also one of the things that we have to deal with. We literally are walking around in spaces, interacting with people who have never apologized for the hurt and the pain that they've caused.
Sure.
But we have to integrate and behave like everything is normal, And then when we complain about the fact that we can't breathe, they say to us that we're pulling the race card, So a lot of us have sold out, and it's sad. But also I'm conflicted because I know the pain of having to provide for oneself and the pressure of having to provide for family as well. It's a lot.
True.
And not everyone has got the privilege of having parents who are educated and employed. A lot of our parents are not any of that.
True.
Are either unemployed, or they're uneducated, or they're both. And so, I mean, it's not to say that I completely, don't understand their psychology. I get it. I get where it comes from. And a part of me empathizes, but we came here to finish what our forebears started. And we cannot relinquish that. We cannot halt the project of Black liberation, of women's liberation in our lifetime, of liberation from the clutches of white heteropatriarchy and all of its diverse oppressions of ableism, elitism, racism, misogynoir. The country, we can't pass that to someone else. Sure. And now we have our degrees, our PhDs, we are advocates, we are lawyers, we're engineers. But we are held back because not only are we selling out, but we're also just not finding each other. We're not finding each other in the same room so that we can unpack what's going on. Because we got to school and we got our education, we've got our apartment, we've got our cars. Okay, so then what next? Because South Africa is still a racist post-colonial nation. A pseudo post-colonial nation. Our society is very much colonized. The only thing that's different is that we don't get beaten on the street as we walk around. But we did get beaten during coronavirus. Coronavirus showed us a lot of things about who we really are and where we are at as a society. It took a virus from China to show us who we are really. Because we didn't see those soldiers in the white suburbs, but we sure did see them in the townships, beating people and killing them as well. Even before, mind you, the lockdown, people were being told while they were in their garden to get inside their house. Violently to get inside their house when that wasn't even part of the regulation, mind you. But they were very enthusiastic in overpopulating those Black spaces, of militarizing. I mean, we militarized Black spaces like that. It was so easy. And in a matter of days, people were already being violated. So I think that it's the selling out, it's the disunity, and it's and the disunity comes as a result of the damage that's created by whiteness.
Okay.
It was very important for us to be disunited. It's important. We must understand these politics and how they work. Disuniting, whether I'm Zulu, whether you are Tswana or Sotho, making me see you as different to me, it was important for the project, especially of apartheid. I remember when I was reading Verwoerd's speeches. I mean, colonization and apartheid, and this is the irony, colonization and apartheid respected Black contribution. They respected Black labor because they knew that they couldn't get what they want without our labor.
Without us.
They respected it. They respected it so much that they were willing to go to what is called the Bantustans or the homelands and negotiate with chiefs. Perhaps it didn't start now, it started a long time ago with the negotiation of chiefs in the community to say, listen, I respect you, there's just something that you want to do. What do you want? What do you want in exchange? We'll give you some of our power, just as long as you make sure that women stay here and you make sure that your people don't develop above this. Chiefs were a part of that. Monarchies were a part of that negotiation of power. So they could have a little bit more power over the rest of their people and be able to be at least be able to negotiate power dynamics with white people who they saw as superior at some point. So it was important for us to see each other as different, because that difference makes it difficult for us to agree. Because when we are in agreement, when we agree on one thing and we laser focused on that thing, we're unstoppable.
Sure.
Look at the fact, for instance, that women are in the majority in the world. We're in the majority. If we wanted to, women could shut the whole world's economy down. We could shut it all down. We could shut the whole, South Africa, women are in majority here. We could shut everything down. The country doesn't run without us. Let's just be very honest about that. But we don't agree on a number of things.
Sure.
We've got women who are policing underwear, policing wombs, policing everything except for the thing that actually needs our attention.
True.
You know? So that disunity, we also created names, interesting names, black, colored. Although we are all the same thing, you're black, we're colored, and it's not to say that coloredness doesn't have history or blackness doesn't have history, but when they made that decision to name us differently, and not only to name us differently, but to then use that name to weaponize those names and those labels so that it would explain the difference in treatment. That was done strategically. It was done strategically to make sure that this group, these people of color, they'll never get along. Verwoerd is laughing in his grave saying, I told you so. This is how we need that black labor, and we need it for free. So we can make profits. We need to extract as much as we can from women's labor and from men's labor, as much as we can. We need to, it's a form of modern day slavery, to slavery essentially. But it was underpinned with a very deep psychology that attacked black identity. That made me think, Kia, she's not Zulu. No, all of these things. So it's the disunification, it's the selling out, but also there's another form of selling out that I have to touch on for today. I just have to.
Okay.
And it's probably the biggest betrayal of our liberation movement, which is the betrayal of black men. Black men have betrayed us because black men, just like those chiefs and the white people, black men have also been negotiating with whiteness and white monopoly capital at the expense of black women. Black men are aware that they get paid more money than black women for the same job. They know it. Black women are paid the least in our industries. Black women are paid the least in our society. What do black men have to say about that? Because I have never seen a black man marching for a black woman. I just haven't seen it. Or I haven't seen it recently. Maybe I was too young to have noticed that black men were protesting and sweating and fighting police on the streets for the liberation of black women. Maybe I was too young back then, I don't remember. But I haven't seen in contemporary times, in as much as society is exceptionally violent against women of color. Black women, Black queer women, but I've never seen Black men break a sweat to protect Black women and say we no longer allow the exclusion of Black women in the formal economy. We will no longer allow Black women to be paid unequally because of the color of their skin and because of their gender or their orientation. We will not allow it anymore. I've never seen it. I don't see Black men protecting Black women in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I can even give a very recent example. The Clicks incident that took place last year, where Clicks advertised one woman having beautiful, straight, Caucasian hair, and the other one having ugly, grotesque, frizzy hair belonging to a Black person. Whether you want to further categorize that Black person, she's Black. So the entire incident ended with, us only capturing it as a racial incident.
True.
But we never went in to say, finally, we can have a national discourse about the fact that Black women's bodies have been attacked since time immemorial. We have been attacking and brutalizing Black women's appearances, but we will buy them and pay for them and wear them on our bodies. And then when they're on our bodies, we can get a reality TV show that goes on for 20 seasons. So for me, it is almost unforgivable. It is almost unforgivable that Black men have not gone to bat for us like that, because quite frankly, they've just got more power than we do in society. They do. They do because of their gender. They do because they are more likely to be seated at the tables of power than we are. And so what conversations take place when they're at the table, folks?
Yeah.
It's not about us, because when that incident took place, there was a particular political party that sat at the table with the people who had power. And not even once did we get to a point where we unpacked the attack of Black women, misogynoir.
Yeah.
It became a Black issue, but we're not willing to really go in to unpack colorism and lookism that Black women have been subjected to. Look at our music videos. I mean, I was watching some quite music videos. I've been noticing the pattern. I've been noticing how, in the late 90s and early 2000s, we had our Black sisters there dancing, and how today in our music videos, we don't even see Black. You can have a music video that doesn't have a Black woman nowadays. Or the woman is so Black. I mean, her skin is so not Black that she looks ambiguous. Her identity becomes ambiguous. They cannot show if she's Black or mixed with something else, but that's what they like. They like a Black woman who doesn't look Black.
True.
Who's not melanated. So melanated skin, is a problem even when we're among ourselves. So I think that, for me, that betrayal for me, it hits.
Yeah,
deep.
no.
It hits very, very deep.
I think honestly, one of the reasons that I always try to keep quiet, and as much as I fail dismally, is because I know how angry and how passionate I get about certain topics. Just listening to you speak, I'm one person, I really can't hide it. Like it really frustrates me, and I'm yet to get to a day where I can sit when I can just talk on it and just explain and use my words rather than just fighting it. But we're pressed for time, so I think we're just gonna leave it here for today. But I think I just really needed to say, Uguti, it's very important for us to have this platform, and I'm grateful for this platform. And I don't take this opportunity lightly. Uguti, I'm allowed to be on a platform such as Arise Black Child, and particularly the Blacknificent Show, because it's an opportunity for me and for a lot of other youths to learn and to engage with elders and great Africans before us, such as yourself, such as the guests that I have had in my past. You know, I think it's a shame that you guys are willing, you guys have the time, and you guys have the passion and the care for us to borrow us your minds and to just teach us how to work in this world. And we're not using it, we're taking it for granted. You know, I think there's a lot that as the youth of today we're yet to understand and to learn. But I think watching these shows and just watching the show to say, okay, I support you, I saw your show, that to me is not enough. I think the knowledge that we receive here is something that we need to take into our daily lives and to apply it into our daily lives. I think it's important for us to remember, even in the hustle and bustle, that we are global citizens and this country is our country and it's ours to protect, it's ours to serve. And if we do not want to have an active role in molding the future of our country, our nation, then who do we expect to do so? That's the end of it from me. I'd like to thank you, Thando, for being an amazing guest. I think I'm going to address you correctly. Advocate Thando Gumede. Thank you for being my guest tonight. You've been amazing. Thank you for borrowing me your mind. And it's honestly been a great pleasure. And I'm humbled. It's been an honor. That's all for tonight's episode.
Thank you so much. I think before you sign off, I would be doing an injustice if I don't thank you. Thank you for being the young revolutionary Black African woman that you are. Thank you for everything that you've done to try and emancipate us, you know, psychologically, mentally, economically, in our education systems in particular. You are already our leader. You are not going to become a leader, you already are. And I have been in awe of you, and I am inspired by you, and I am dedicated to you. I am going to use all of my skills and my knowledge and my expertise for you and for your generation and for the rest of the youth of this country, and in making sure that we are empowered in every way, shape, or form. When I see people like you, I know that this country is in good hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I am in a little bit of shock. My role model just told me great, but anyway, let's relax. That is all for tonight's episode. Please remember to like and share this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Tune in again next week, Sunday, for another amazing episode of the Blacknificent Show. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night, everybody.
Bye.